in case you missed it, Brian Ferentz, the offensive coordinator, got a new contract. Some people are really reacting to this. Now, if you don't know, Kirk Ferentz, who is Brian's daddy, is the head coach. He's been there a long time. But, Joe, I'm going to tell you something before you get rolling. Brian Ferentz not being fired is not necessarily out of the norm for his dad. Just remember that when we talk about it. But go ahead, buddy. What do you think of this? What do you think of this contract extension?
Well, the extension, in a way, it's not a demotion, but it's a pay cut that he is now getting paid $50,000 less. So that was what the original headline was supposed to be, Blake. But then we dig a little bit deeper. There's incentives that are placed on this. He needs to score 25 points per game. It does not need to be all offensive points. They can benefit from the defensive touchdowns that they score, which, knowing Kirk Ferentz and his success as a head coach, that tends to happen pretty often. But I think that one of the most ridiculous things is knowing that Brian Ferentz is making $850,000 to produce the product that he did last season and in his time as the offensive coordinator for Iowa. Look, I think that there's not much that needs to be, I think, dove into on this. We can sit here and try to pull all the numbers. Everybody knows how.
A word.
I just made it a word.
Anyway, continue.
We all know the hilarity of how terrible they were offensively last year. 18.6 points per game. That was what they averaged. They barely were moving the ball. And had it not been for a safety, they might not have even beaten South Dakota State, who won the FCS National Championship this past year. I don't think the guy should be employed. And I know that you're probably going to come and point out here that Kirk Ferentz typically gives a long runway for a lot of his offensive coordinators. But I think, one, circumstantially, it being your son and him not performing well, you got to hold him to a higher standard. The only way that the guy's going to get better is if he's held accountable. I'm not saying you completely remove him from the staff. I don't know if it's a position demotion, but for the results that you had in a Power 5 conference, competing for a Big Ten championship when you were in it the year before, he needs to be held accountable. The guy sucks. One of the worst offensive coordinators in college football.
So Brian Ferentz, the offensive coordinator at Iowa, is probably, and I don't say this lightly, maybe the worst Power 5 offensive coordinator in the country.
Absolutely.
Now, there are some questions I have. How much is his dad involved in this? How much has he let him go? But look, they won a game against South Dakota State, who was the FCS national champion, 7-3. The following week, they score their first offensive touchdown against Iowa State and lose 10-7. They would play Wisconsin, and they would only have 146 total yards of offense, and they would beat Wisconsin 24-10. Joe, they were dead last in Power 5 in offense, second to last in offense in 130th. They were 129th on third down, 123rd in passing. It's bad. It's extremely bad. But Kirk Ferentz, in his defense, it is bad.
There's a way to defend him? I didn't know that there was a defense.
There's only one way. Okay. There's only one way. Now, there's multitudes of reasons to fire him. And I'm not sitting here trying to justify that he should be the offensive coordinator. Joe, I would have literally fired the man after Iowa State. Okay?
Yes.
2 straight weeks of only scoring 1 touchdown is unacceptable. However, Phil Parker has been at Iowa since 1999, has been their DC since 2012. That's 10 years. He's had some rough seasons himself. Now, he hasn't had rough seasons like Brian Ferentz.
Yes.
But Kirk has literally allowed coaches to work themselves out of it. We look at it as, I think in a lot of senses, well, it's his son. He doesn't want to fire him. And I'm with you. I understand that. Look, I am a father of 2. I didn't grow up rich. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. We lived comfortably. My parents tried to give me everything that I asked for and could, and we were a middle-class family. And I work, and Joe, you know how hard I work to provide for my family, to give them things better than what I ever had. With that being said, I'm never firing my son from whatever it is that I'm doing. unless, let me just say this. I would never tell my son you're fired. I would just have to tell him, look, you're out for a minute. Like I'm putting you in timeout. It puts him in such a bad spot that I don't know why Iowa hasn't fired Kirk Ferentz in the first place. Because, listen, it is damn near negligent for you to run an offense back out there next year that could do the same exact thing. Joe, how they won football games last year is because their defense was so good. If that defense would have been in the SEC, they still would have been a top 10 defense. Without a question, they were the number 2 scoring defense in the country last year. They literally were top 5 in every defensive category. Maybe you should recruit some offensive players next time.
No, absolutely. And I think them adding Cade McNamara is a positive step forward. I have no idea why that he made that decision. I think that there were probably better opportunities for him than to play in this archaic, terrible offense. But look, I know that it's a tough topic of discussion of what would you do if you were Kirk Ferentz? Would you fire your son? And I will say, I actually sat through this when I was playing at the University of Rhode Island. Head coach Jim Fleming, our offensive coordinator was Will Fleming, his son. And when I tell you we had one of the worst coached offenses schematically, that is not even a joke. We had some very talented kids. We had a number of kids who were at Power 5 programs. We had a quarterback who came from UCF. We also had another quarterback who came from New Mexico who was recruited to play running back at Power 5 programs. We had a lot of talented kids, yet we called a lot of bubble screens and slants that did not produce any yards. It was a very uncreative offense.
And I'm assuming he got fired?
He got fired after 3 years, right when I was leaving. And that opened up them to then hire one of the best offensive coordinators in the FCS. And their offense has been a total 180. They signed Kasim Hill, who's a very talented player who was at Tennessee and Maryland for a minute. And they have been a total 180 in terms of production. I'm just anti-nepotism because it sets you up for these situations. I don't think there's anything wrong with the elaborate coaching tree that you're going to end up building as a head coach with all the connections that you make to help your son get a job at another program. Let him work his way up and earn it. But I freaking hate this. I hate that he worked his way up into the offensive coordinator role and he's not qualified. He's very clearly, blatantly not qualified for this position. There is nothing that he's done in his career other than having the last name Ferentz to qualify him for the position. I don't think anyone else would have hired him for this job. At least not right now.
There's parts that I agree with, right? Like, you're not wrong. But I do hope that my son Benjamin or my daughter Jewel one day gets hired by ESPN because her daddy was Blake Ruffino. There are parts that I understand.
You're in that circumstance, though, that you're not going to be the executive producer, right?
No, because listen,
you just would be high up there. You wouldn't be their boss.
Right. Well, you know how I am. I'd punch somebody in the face. I can't, you're late if you're on time with me. I think that you know that. But I get where you're coming from. You know what's more crazy to me than anything out of all of this is that the Iowa fan base is not burning that football ops building to the ground. And obviously I mean that figuratively. Joe, I'm going to make a very hot take. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
Iowa could have been in contention to be a playoff team if their offense would have been 50th in the country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Their defense is utter world. Like, I think the point that, like, where I sit at with this Iowa team is like, dude, they're so good defensively. It is ridiculous how polar opposite Iowa is from offense to defense. Again, I don't want to turn this into an SEC, and I know this is somewhat of an SEC show. That would never be allowed. Maybe Vanderbilt would allow that to happen in the SEC to where you could have a really good defense. Yay, we're winning some football games, yada, yada, yada. But the 13 other teams in this conference would never allow for you to have the second best defense in the country, and you just go out to the sunset. And Joe, the most iconic thing that Iowa did last year, remember the jet sweep?
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, like it hit 77 dudes in the butt. It made Mark Sanchez look like a rookie.
Right.
Okay. When it comes to butt fumbling, I don't get it. I would be so mad. I would be screaming on Twitter, fire Kurt Ferentz, because both of them, truthfully, both of them deserve to be fired. Brian and his dad.
Part of it is a little bit of chicken before the egg, too, because let's be real, Spencer Petras stunk. I mean, he was one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the Power Five. Ultimately, I do completely agree with you. I think if you put, here's the take, if you put Stetson Bennett in that offense, I think that they would have.
Don't you dare!
They would have been competing
dare
for the Big Ten. Absolutely.
Well, let me.
Purdue could make it to
that Magnum era. Do you think they can compete now?
Not with Brian Ferentz running that offense. Because Cade McNamara is fine. Like, he's fine. Stetson Bennett was better than Cade McNamara.
You shit on Stetson Bennett for 17 straight weeks, and then you could have come in here and says, well, they would have had Stetson Bennett. They would have won football games.
But that wasn't what I was saying about Stetson Bennett. I was misunderstood. All I said was Stetson's not an all-time great quarterback. I said that he was a great player at Georgia, and he was a great player this past season. I think he deserved all the recognition he earned. All of it. I never once said that he wasn't a good player. I just said that he wasn't an all-time great. My point here is if you plug in one of those quarterbacks on that roster and there's limitations to that roster, they likely could have won the Big Ten.
You're no shit. There's some limitations. You're in Iowa. Name one thing Iowa's known for, and don't say corn.
Good linebackers like Jack Campbell.
Did Luke Kuechly, did he go to Iowa?
No, it was Boston College. Boston College.
You remember those long streaks of linebackers coming out of Iowa and Boston College? Where did those dudes go to?
It's a great question. And they're still able, Iowa to that point, though, is still able to produce so much defensive success. They have been so good defensively.
It's ridiculous how good they are defensively, Joe. Like, again, this is legitimately why, like, people in the South, especially the Southeast, make fun of all other conferences. Yeah. When you can have that good of a defense and just shit the bed offensively,